All righty. We're recording. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, yeah. Well, Dr. Sarah Starnes, first of all, is a friend of mine. She's a member of my church, South City Church. She also is a doctor and works at St. Louis U. She's a prof over there, so she teaches, she does research. And first time I met Sarah, I said, "Well, Sarah, what do you do?" And she says, yeah, I do autopsies on babies. And I was like, man, that's some powerful stuff. So, yeah, so, but we also are blessed to have two people, her and David, part of the fellowship, who can talk to us about COVID at a level that's not just political, not just hearsay, but they can actually talk about it, what it does as a virus, and Christian brother and sister. And so, they just want us, they just advise us on, things that we can do, and, what can we do to be cautious, and how to pray. So I'm turn this over to Sarah, and Sarah, take it away.
Pastor Mike, thank you so much. And to especially to Bishop Phil as well. I would say for the August session that they successfully recruited me. And I'm so excited to once again be back with you all. I really appreciate the privilege of sharing with you all as leaders of God's church in St. Louis. The influence that you all have in the lives of the people in your congregations, it's really hard to overstate. So I'm thrilled to be with you. Back in August, for those of you who were not able to participate at that time, in essence, I'll do a little bit of introduction, a quick review of what we talked about in August. And then what I'd like to focus on today, what we didn't have time to talk about in August, the vaccine, the coronavirus vaccine. You can't turn on a news channel on TV. You can't pull up an online news article without there being some reference, it seems to me, of the vaccine, whether it's political, work, when will we get it? What will we do with it? How soon can we all get it? So I'd really like to focus on talking about the vaccine today from the perspective of what would be useful for the church to know, what would be important when we are guiding folks in our congregations, brothers and sisters in Christ, in how to make decisions about the vaccine whenever it does become available. And then I would, as Pastor Stovall said, I would like to leave a few minutes for questions for folks that want to ask about the vaccine or anything related to coronavirus. And if I don't know, I will be very upfront and say, we'll have to ask folks with more expertise than myself. Quickly, as Mike said, I am a physician. I'm a pathologist by training, affiliated with St. Louis University. And what I do every single day is I direct a medical clinical laboratory. And so ever since the pandemic started, what I've had to know for necessity to do my job is especially related to testing. So someone comes in, they have symptoms, what sort of test do we do for the coronavirus? So I've had to keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on by virtue of my position. You may want to know, where do I get my news? A lot of it, as I mentioned last time in August, a lot of it comes from the public health departments, more so the Illinois Department of Public Health, because that's where the hospital that I primarily work at, in affiliation with St. Louis University. It's located in Illinois, but it's very similar to a lot of what's being shared from the Missouri Department of Public Health. So all that, in addition to medical news sites, are where I get my news. So this is not just from CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, although many of those outlets do talk about some of the material that I'll be covering today. Let's see. Last time, quick mention. Last time we talked a great deal about particular recommendations for church congregations, particular things like, in a pandemic, is it safe to conduct baptism? And if so, how do we go about that? What are recommendations from a scientific perspective, and yet honoring what we're called to do as the church? There's a document that the Christian Medical and Dental Association, who I'm a part of, a document that they put out that last time Mike, I believe, had access to that document. It's very lengthy, very detailed, but it goes over most every situation you might find yourself in your church about different practices, traditional Christian practices, singing, baptism, communion. And so I'm hoping this is still the case, Mike, that if anyone would want access to that document again, I believe Mike would be able to send it to you once more.
Yeah, and I think,
So,
Robert, do you have it? I'm sorry. I was wondering if Robert had that.
Yeah, I believe it's on our Google Drive that I sent out the link to, and we can send it out with it again. So.
All right.
Excellent,
Sorry.
excellent, excellent. So especially for those who were not able to participate in August, I think that could be a good resource for you all to have to discuss with other church leaders. So last time we talked about what is coronavirus, and in particular how it spread. We've learned so much since really when it started in China at the end of 2019, which is why it's called COVID-19 and not COVID-20, although in the United States, of course, much of what we've experienced as fallout from this pandemic is in this current year, 2020. About spread, we talked about that mostly this is spread by respiratory droplets, very, very small particles, travel through the air, and much less physical touch or contamination of surfaces you might encounter. And so that's why all of these recommendations that I know everyone's familiar with by now have come out about making sure to wear a mask, making sure to watch your distance from other folks, at least 6 feet, especially if you're indoors, washing your hands. And finally, I added this as a fourth W, weather permitting, moving things outside. So the risk of transmission of the virus is much less outdoors than it is indoors. And then, as I mentioned, we talked about specific considerations for Christian worship. And then very briefly, last time I mentioned about the vaccine, and I didn't mean this to be a flippant reference at all. I hope no one took it that way, but Psalm 20, verse 7, if we could modify it for today's era, today's news cycle, I think the psalmist might say, some trust in horses and others in a vaccine, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. And so I did want to spend more time talking about the vaccine. That's what we'll spend the next 10 minutes or so on. And first of all, again, if anyone took it last time as my being flippant or dismissive of a potential vaccine, that was not at all what I intended. Vaccines, when we have them for so many infections of childhood. We have them for smallpox that's has erased smallpox from the earth. And that's a miracle. That is the work of God. So vaccines are a gracious gift when we're able to have them. And I want, as I mentioned just a little bit ago, I want to share some information about the coronavirus vaccines that are being developed specifically so that you all in your churches, in your Bible studies, when a fellow brother or sister in Christ asks, well, gosh, what do you all think about the vaccine? You'll have a reference to speak to after the end of talk today. So I'll talk a little bit, this is just the outline. I'll talk a little bit about the history of vaccination. I promise very, very, very briefly. How do viruses work? How do vaccines get developed? What are the phases of vaccine development? It seems to me those are often thrown around. Oh, this vaccine is in phase 3. But what does that mean? And then the timeline specifically in the United States for vaccine development for COVID-19. And finally, and possibly most important for this group, some ethical considerations about the vaccine that are really hard to find in mainstream media, but I think will be of interest to this group. So first of all, the history of vaccination. Starting actually centuries ago in Turkey and in parts of Africa, there were smallpox inoculations that folks did to help prevent the spread. Some folks later in the 1700s in the Americas and in Europe noticed, my goodness, these folks in Turkey and these folks in Africa, when they do this inoculation, they don't get ill in the way that we get ill with smallpox. That in turn, later in the 1700s led Edward Jenner to use the cowpox virus instead of smallpox, and cow, of course, Latin word for cow, vaccinia, to inoculate folks with that. And they noticed people didn't get smallpox. So that was the first vaccine. So this is a very old technique in general, even though we've spiced it up with modern science, molecular techniques. But really looking at all medical interventions, vaccines are one of the safest. The reason they are so safe, this will come into play when we talk about currently what's happening with coronavirus vaccines, is it takes years to develop vaccines. Normally 10 years to produce a vaccine to a common childhood virus. That does not seem slow, because we want to make sure it's effective and safe. Those are always the two-prong qualities we look for in a vaccine. Is it safe? Is it effective? So the reason that vaccines work goes back to how viruses work. And I don't mean for you all to have a bad flashback to some biology class that you took at one point in time. So this will be very, very brief. But remember that a virus is really not an organism, right? A virus is really some genetic material, often with some proteins that cover it up. And it's a parasitic machine, but it cannot replicate on its own. What does it need? Any virus of any kind needs a cell, a cellular organism as its host. So this, keep this in mind when we talk about ethical considerations later. But because of that, if we can hijack that viral replicating mechanism, that's one way to develop a vaccine. Other ways include showing the protein of the virus to our immune cells, and that can help induce immunity from a vaccine. So there are many different mechanisms, all targeted at either the genetic material or the protein material, usually to get our bodies to respond and fight off the virus. So that's how a very broad overview of how vaccine development works. So what are the phases of vaccine development, particularly in the US, but they tend to use these in Europe as well. And the World Health Organization also says this is the way to go, right? So there are 6 phases. The first is exploratory, basically people looking around what could be a possible target or approach to developing our vaccine. The second is preclinical, which involves producing some vaccine, maybe doing a little bit of testing just in a lab, not yet on people. The third phase that many of you are probably hearing about in the news, phase 3, is clinical. So now we involve people for the first time, giving them a vaccine and seeing what happens. The fourth phase is regulatory review and approval. In the United States, that's the Food and Drug Administration's approval, FDA approval. The fifth phase is manufacturing. Usually that's the fifth phase. We'll talk about right now, there are some different things happening with that phase 5 seems to be coming before phase 4. And then the sixth and final phase is quality control, making sure the purity of that vaccine is maintained, and really making sure that what we thought were safe and effective qualities of the vaccine, that they continue over time. Inside of the clinical phase, phase 3, that itself also has several different phases. And right now, there are a handful of coronavirus vaccines in development that have made it to the end of the third phase of clinical trials. So the first phase, basically inside of clinical trials, involves just a handful of people, usually less than 100, to see how safe is this vaccine overall, is it effective? Up to phase 2A and 2B, now we're extending to thousands of people to see not only is it still safe, is it still effective, what are the side effects? What sort of side effects might we expect, or some that we don't expect? The third phase, up to from 60,000 up to hundreds of thousands of folks, we're looking for, again, safety, efficacy, side effects, and also long-term effects. So for most vaccines, this phase on its own can last easily 2 years, okay? The exploratory and preclinical phases often take years, and then the back end takes years. So that's how you might get to a place where 10 years is totally an expected timeline for vaccine development. But as many of you know, that's not what's happening right now with the coronavirus. So let's talk about specifically coronavirus vaccine development timeline. So many of you have, I'm sure, have heard of Operation Warp Speed. So the United States government has invested now billions, so hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to different pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines in a very, very short period of time. And I get a lot of questions about this. Many of my friends, some folks at church, and others not in the field say, how can it still be safe and effective if we've tried to crunch this timeline down to just a few months, or maybe just, a year or two? The way this happens, by pouring money into vaccine development, it allows to test more people at a earlier phase of vaccine development. And it also allows us to ramp up manufacturing very quickly. So remember, I said that the fifth phase is usually manufacturing, but right now you may have heard news stories. A couple of the pharmaceutical companies, they're taking a risk, right? They've already got hundreds of thousands of vaccine doses ready to go, while they're still testing. So they're risking money, but this could be beneficial to us. So US politics right now related to the coronavirus vaccine, there's a lot of concern about the election on November 3rd. Is there going to be political pressure to release a vaccine sooner rather than later? I am encouraged. From a human perspective, of course, all of this is in the Lord's hands, but from a human perspective, the folks who are in charge of vaccine production, one of whom, Dr. Moncef Slaoui, he's the head, the scientific head, I would say, of Operation Warp Speed. He and vaccine scientists have said, if there is political pressure involved, here we will resign because we want it to be safe and effective. That's the whole goal. So actually, when you think, well, what is the timeline? What should we expect? Not before the election. It's possible, it's extremely unlikely that we would have a vaccine by then. Now, by late December or January, there may be some of these candidate vaccines that are ready to go. However, even then, from a manufacturing perspective, even if we're ready to manufacture as soon as the FDA says, yes, you are approved, most likely just a few healthcare workers and people in high-risk situations would have access to the vaccine early in 2021. A very, very realistic but ambitious goal would be for many folks in the United States, the average folks, not in a high-risk circumstance, maybe by the middle or fall of 2021, would have access, ideally, to a coronavirus vaccine. So that brings us up to, I know we're walking through this very quickly, ethical considerations. So if a vaccine is available and it prevents disease, we talked last time, and many of you know firsthand, maybe you're from your own experience with this virus, maybe with a loved one or folks in your church, that this is a deadly disease. It causes a great deal of harm, even in folks who don't die from this disease. So what could possibly be concerning if we have a vaccine that the Lord has blessed us with, we could say, to help prevent this disease? So in vaccine development, we said that what does a virus need to replicate? It needs a cell, a cellular host. So several vaccines, unfortunately, are in development, either in production or testing, using cell lines, cells that derive from abortions, elective abortions performed in the 70s. So these cell lines have been perpetuated. They're usually from the kidney of an aborted fetus. So right now, specifically, AstraZeneca's adenovirus vector vaccine and Janssen's adenovirus vector vaccine, they're pushing the limits of they might be ready very soon, but they have been developed using fetal cell lines. Another one, Moderna's RNA messenger RNA test used fetal cell lines for the end testing of their vaccine. So these three companies right now, of the 6 leading companies, others include Pfizer's mRNA vaccine, Novavax, and Sanofi. You might hear those names of pharmaceutical companies. They have been using cell lines that are not derived from abortions. And it's very possible to do that safely, and effectively. But it's something that while I can't prescribe for even any other Christian to say, you must stay away from this vaccine, it has ethical problems with it, I do want this group to know that again, in development, some of these have relied on the death of an unborn child. Now, you may decide with your own conscience, between yourself and the Lord, in discussion with other mature Christians, that might be worth the risk, the moral risk. But I wanted to share that with this particular group. So that was a very quick walk through an overview of vaccines, and the coronavirus vaccine in particular. So I want to stop at this point and pause. What comments or questions do you all have?
Okay, so yeah, this part of it with questions and stuff. So if you could just unmute yourself, and of course be cordial and nice to one another. Unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask the question that you might have. And then this will be recorded and added to the recording and stuff. So go ahead.
My name's Wendell Washington, and my question at this point, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sarah. My question is this. At this point, I had not known anyone to come down with COVID-19. And then my baby sister came down with it. She's a bank manager, okay? And the way that this thing is coming forth to the public, it's a lot of uncertainty about whether a person should take the vaccine or is it safe, or if they're following the science or whatever, because it seems like they don't want the scientists to say exactly what's going on, okay? And then leadership is not following their own protocol. So my question is this: how can we be expected to take something when there is so much skepticism and I'll just say dishonesty in the way that things is being presented?
So thank you so much, Wendell. That's an excellent question. I do think this is my opinion. I do think that much of what is usually very straightforward science and development of vaccines, that normally I don't see much politics in that, right? It's just medicine. People want to help other people get well and prevent disease, but it does seem that there is some political attempts at manipulation, perhaps for political gain. What I would say is that now ultimately my trust is in the Lord. My trust is not in man. But from what I have heard of from the leaders, the scientific leaders who are developing these vaccines, Dr. Slaoui is a great example. When they say, look, we really, we are only going to sign our name to sign off on these vaccines as being safe, apart from political manipulation. And if we are pressured, we will resign. I'm taking their assurances at face value. So I am comforted that the scientific community is on the up and up, regardless of what other politics play in to consideration, if that makes sense. But I think truly, I think prayer and listening to your conscience, finding good news sources, reputable news sources, I think can all be helpful in this decision. And I certainly, as I said last time, I don't envy church leaders in St. Louis right now or anywhere in trying to help their congregants make these decisions. These are such tricky times. It's always difficult to be a leader in the church, but right now I imagine it's just extremely difficult. So you all have my prayer support daily. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I mean, you gave the best answer that's out there right now. It's pretty consistent, and anybody that has viewed this thing, you have to look at it sort of like that, you know, and I appreciate you taking time out to just present, you know, these various factors to us. Thank you.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Okay, Sarah, I had a question. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for speaking to us this morning. But my question, and something that stopped me as you were speaking, is the timeline of the vaccines being available. It seems like you're saying maybe won't actually be available for people like us until mid-2021. And so with all the things that are happening, and I have people in our church and in our family concerned about the winter weather coming in, the flu season, but also myself, I have grandchildren whose school might be reopening at the end of the month. And so we have families and friends who are saying, should my children return to school? If vaccines are mandatory at the end of the year for them to return to school, what are those decisions that I need to make? Or is it something we need not worry about because we really don't think it's going to happen until possibly the next semester? And so I'm looking at timelines, and holidays are coming. People want to gather together. So we're still looking at the things you told us last month concerning our gathering, but thinking the vaccine is coming is going to free us. Is that going to free us to gather if the vaccine comes quickly? But we still have to be with a little mask, right? Can you help us with that? I hope I didn't ask too many questions.
No, no, no. Thank you so much, Ms. Renee. So if I could paraphrase, Ms. Renee's question is really, so if in a perfect world, which of course we don't live in, if everything goes seamlessly, we might have a safe and effective vaccine for everybody sometime in the middle of next year. What does that mean for what we do right now?
Yes.
How should that affect our lives? What should we do differently? So those are great questions. And really, there are three options. You notice I like the number 3. It's like
That's a
Pastor
good
Mike,
number.
it's like the 3-point sermon. So 3 is good to remember. So the 3 options for what could happen with the coronavirus pandemic, okay, of how it could end. One is we have a vaccine that's safe, it's effective. Most people get it so that there's not transmission in the population. Second option, we develop a very effective treatment, not a preventative like a vaccine, but treatments that once you get ill, hey, we've got this treatment, this therapy that's going to help you survive and help you get better. There are lots of treatments out there right now. Actually, one I'll mention by name, Regeneron's antibody therapy that you may have heard President Trump received for his recent bout with coronavirus. That one has also been developed using fetal cell lines. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. But lots of treatments out there that are only marginally successful. So we don't have a nice silver bullet. The third option for how the pandemic could end is that for some reason, the virus fizzles. It develops some mutations that make it either less contagious or less virulent and less likely to cause severe disease. So in the meantime, what do? We do have holiday gatherings coming up, like you mentioned. Wintertime, it's going to be a lot harder to be outside. But frankly, I think sort of doing the wearing of the masks, the washing of the hands, the watching distance, we're going to be doing this for a while. Now, it may be, especially when they talk about restarting in-person school, of course, as a lot of you know, the factors that they look at to decide when to start in-person gatherings again often have to do with the prevalence of infection in the community. So the more people that we have who are taking care to wear masks, to be safe around other people and very distant, that's painful in the moment, but if it reduces the amount of viral transmission, then we might be able to start doing more things in person because it's just a lower chance of catching the virus, if that makes sense. But yeah, so for upcoming gatherings, there are already recommendations about minimizing the amount of folks that you have at Thanksgiving or at a Christmas celebration, or to do it in a manner that we've already talked about, spreading out, trying to have it outside if it's not too cold, things like that. So God is still in control, but in the meantime, what he seems to have for us is the pandemic for the foreseeable future.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. Look.
Yes.
Okay. Hey, great. You are so helpful, Dr. Sarah. I really thank you and appreciate you. You brought some other things to light that I'm sure a lot of people hadn't thought about, as far as the the stem cell research and different things that's dealing with abortion and different things. I also agree with you that perfect world, we would possibly have everything by next year. But since this is not a perfect world, it'll probably be longer. So
Very
yeah,
possible.
I'm gonna say something about the holidays later, not pertaining to pertaining to the virus. But the question that I had for you, and you're doing an awesome job. The question that I had, actually, it's a twofold question. First part is that, have you heard anything about them making mandating the vaccine? Because just like the flu vaccine, I think David Bell is still on here. That's our other medical advisor. I need to hook y'all up so y'all can talk. But we had talked last time with him about some of the things, knowing that the vaccine is actually he was describing as it's more of like a dead organism, a dead cell of the virus. And with the flu vaccine, hundreds of thousands of people are afraid to take the flu vaccine. And as Wendell was saying, with the uncertainty and with so many misinformations, and our trust for not just our political, but the trust for even the doctors, because some of the doctors are political and lean toward either side. With our mistrust with everything, a lot of people are not going to want to take the vaccine. So I want to ask, the first question is, have you heard anything about them saying mandate? The second part is, you might be able to answer. A lot of people believe that once they have the virus, then they can no longer be reinfected. So a lot of people think, okay, well, I didn't have it, so I'm okay now. I can be around people, and it's, I won't get it. So ask them about, have you heard about them mandating the vaccine? Because a lot of people just not going to want to take it anyway. And have you heard anything? I know it's still early in the game, but have you heard anything about people who've had it where they will not be reinfected?
And I would add to that, thanks, Phil. Those are great questions. I would add to that, are people who have had it and are now over it, can they actually reinfect people? So, like if they were to, have it like a carrier, but not, because that's a whole nother thing. Because people who've had it, they think they don't have to wear a mask because they won't reinfect people and stuff. So does that make sense, Dr. Starnes?
Yes, both,
okay.
To both of you. Thank you, Bishop Phil and Pastor Stovall, for those excellent questions. So to answer the first question, mandating a vaccine, what I have heard to this point in time, I have not, is that there will be no mandate. Part of which, as you already pointed out, Bishop Phil, is when they do surveys of Americans and say, if there were a vaccine for this virus today, would you take it? Depending on the survey, sometimes only 40%, 30 to 40% of people say they would even be comfortable taking it right now. So I think it would be very difficult politically, logistically, this is my opinion, to mandate a vaccine that has that much mistrust. Currently, I'll use the flu vaccine as an example. That's an excellent comparison. Where I work, it is mandated to take the influenza, to have the influenza vaccine. I've already had mine this year. However, one can opt out of that. You have to sign 1 million waivers, even if this is your job. So I suspect if there were different parts of the country that mandated it, let's say the city of St. Louis mandated the coronavirus vaccine produced by Novavax in this time next year. for let's say school-age children to go back to school. I imagine there would still be an opportunity to sign a waiver and say, I am not comfortable with this. I do not want my child to have this vaccine, much as we do other vaccines, flu vaccines. Of course, that can become, for the vaccines that have been extremely well vetted, that can become a problem. You may have heard of resurgence of measles in some groups of children who haven't been vaccinated. But of course, again, those vaccines have been tested more than what we're talking about currently with this coronavirus vaccine. So that's to speak to the first question. So the second question, someone knows that pardon me, that's my dog. Someone knows they've had the coronavirus. Maybe they've had it with symptoms. Maybe they have been asymptomatic. They've had no symptoms, but a test came back positive. So are they actually infectious, and for how long? Currently, this is all current information. It might change. The CDC believes, based on medical evidence, that the time for isolation when one would actually be infectious is 10 days from the time. This is for mild, excuse me, I should say this is for mild cases of coronavirus where someone's not had to be hospitalized, but they just have flu-like symptoms. They're able to isolate at home. For a 10-day period, they are infectious and they should not be around anyone. If one has severe coronavirus symptoms, they've been in the hospital, they've had to be on oxygen, maybe they've had to be on a ventilator, at least 20 days, we're thinking that they are probably infectious, even after the end of their symptoms. For folks who've never had symptoms, but they had to take a test for some reason and it came back positive, we treat them as infectious for 10 days from the time of their positive test. Now, with all of these folks, they should still be wearing masks because there's so much that we don't know. They should still be, this is the official recommendation from the CDC, they should still behave as if they have not caught the coronavirus. The only thing that is different for these folks is that if they get within a 3-month period of time from being positive for coronavirus or having those symptoms, within 3 months, if they start to have symptoms of the coronavirus again, they may not need to be tested because we might assume it's just still in their system. Or we might say, you know what? Because you've had coronavirus so recently, maybe we need to test you for influenza. Maybe we need to test you for some of these other respiratory viruses. So their testing might change, but they really should continue to behave in public like the rest of us are once they leave isolation. I know that was a very long answer to your question, Bishop Phil and Pastor Stovall.
No, it's great. So, and actually, we don't know if they, we don't believe that they could be immune to it after they've had it.
Oh, yes, that's right. The question about immunity. Thank you. I forgot about that. So we still don't really know for sure. We, with a lot of other types of coronavirus, because remember, this is just one of many, many, many coronaviruses. Most of them just cause the common cold. Most of the time, our experience is that someone has a coronavirus, they contract it, they get sick, they get better. They do have some immunity, but it's very short-lived. So that's why many of us get colds, you know, every year or two, even if it's in the same family of viruses, because our immunity has waned. So we were immune for a period of time, but then it dissipated. And I would say right now, we really have no idea, no accurate idea of immunity. We do think, based on some studies, that immunity lasts for at least a couple months in some cases, but that then one might be susceptible again. There have already been case reports. One man out of China, he definitely had the coronavirus, I believe, in the last winter. He tested positive, got better. 5 months later, in the late spring, he definitely had it again. They had proven that he had recovered, he was negative, and then he was positive again. So we already know that people can be reinfected, but who's at risk for that, under what circumstances, we just don't know yet.
Okay, that's great. I know we're running out of time, Stovall. One more short, quick question that I think people need to know with the churches opening back up. None of us, well, we're not open fully yet, but a lot of churches are opening up and they have a lot of children coming. I've heard, I don't know how true it is, but I've heard that children at a certain age are even more infectious than grown-ups. It spread the disease even stronger than grown. Can you say anything to that?
Yes. So the question is, children and coronavirus. You know, so many of our churches, our schools, we have lots of children, which is a good. But with coronavirus, the overarching message I would say about children is there's still so much we do not know. What we have learned just for the summer, based on there was a summer camp in Georgia that had a wide age range of children who attended. They had some cautions in place, but in essence, the older children, the teenagers, they seemed in that study, and also from other studies, to contract the virus and transmit the virus about the same as an adult. Okay, so if you're a teenager, think of it right now, think of it like they are at the same risk of spreading and contracting the virus like an adult. Under age 10, it gets kind of strange. They have found that children up to age 5, and may have been what you heard, Bishop Phil, they can have 10 times the amount of virus in their system when we do tests to see how, you have a couple symptoms, how much virus you have. Their viral load can be immense compared to older children or adults, but they don't, for some reason, we don't quite understand. That hasn't shown to also mean the same thing for the ability to transmit it. So really young children, we still just don't have a really good handle, I would say under age 5, of how the coronavirus operates in them. They seem to be able to carry a lot of virus without showing symptoms. Perhaps it's because their immune system is not as developed as older children, but that is a tricky area. Of course, children, it's very hard, young children, to say, hey, stay apart from your friends, or leave that doll alone because, that other little girl had it. I don't envy anyone with a situation of trying to manage a nursery or a daycare or a preschool. That's going to be very, very tough. Children, of course, we know now, sometimes we still hear political, I'm afraid, unfortunately, political discussion about, oh, kids don't get sick. Kids, they're fine. But we know that some children can become very, very ill. Children can die from coronavirus. There are a couple even unusual syndromes right now related to the coronavirus in children. They're very rare, but multi-system inflammatory syndrome. We've had, I believe, 1 or 2 cases in St. Louis, and it's children who've had the coronavirus. So we know it can be serious, but we just don't know the extent, because it's also, in any circumstance, it's difficult to study children from a medical perspective, because it's hard to ask mom and dad, are you okay that we do all this extra testing on your child? So it's a tricky area.
Okay, that's been extremely informative. We want to thank you, Dr. Sarah, for everything that you said. And please stay tuned to talk with Mike. We're going to be needing you. I want to hook you up with David Bell. He's also on here. I think he's still on here today. That's our other medical advisor. I want you guys to talk together because as things come, we need y'all expert opinion with what's going on. Robert and Pastor Mike, did you have something else before I say something about the holidays?
No, I just want to say between Sarah and David, we kind of have I'm calling it the St. Louis Pastors Fellowship Research Medical Team. We have our own medical team. I don't know. I don't think the Clergy Coalition has that. So we got.
I really appreciate you.
Thank you all for having me. Thank
And you did an awesome job today, sir. David, if you're on here, yeah, I really do want to hook you guys up together. So with next month, after the election, there's going to be so many things going on that I want maybe you guys could talk together before the meeting so y'all could bring us some information together that would really be helpful to us because some of the churches are going to be opening up for the holidays and other things. So again, thanks. David, you on here?
Yes, I heard you. I got it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know if you can see him or not, Sarah, but that's David Bell. He works for BJCS and for yeah, well, he'll tell you. But I want to hook you guys up together so you guys can talk before we come on next time. Yeah, I think he's St. Louis University.
Yeah, so let's all just give Dr. Starnes a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for helping us out, for speaking very candidly to us. It's very helpful being able to answer our questions that we have, and being such an advocate for the church in St. Louis in particular. We so appreciate you, Dr. Starnes, with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. And most importantly, I really you all have my prayers because this is such a tricky time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead, Bishop Phil, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. Is that okay? Since we're just focusing the recordings on COVID, then you're going to be speaking about what we'll be doing this fall, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.